John Wick 1, 2 and 3. Once upon a time there was a killer who was feared. His presence was like death incarnate. The industry know him as Baba Yaga. And his name was John Wick. Of course, such a man is a living legend. But no matter how good they are, John is a human being after all. He has a vulnerable side too. 4 years ago he fell in love with a woman. And they ended up getting married. In order to live a normal life, John decided to retire. But not long after retiring, his wife became seriously ill and was unable to leave her bed. John was devastated. No matter how much John begged and pleaded, things hadn't changed. As his best friend had said, killers don't deserve happiness. John could only watch his wife leave. After the funeral, John received a puppy. It was a gift from his wife, hoping that this little creature to accompany his husband through his grief. Understanding his wife's intentions, John treats the puppy like a treasure. Whether he ate, drank, or slept, they were always inseparable. One morning, John was driving his Mustang. He took the dog out for a ride. But he ran into a Yakuza at a gas station. He was the son of a Russian gangster. He's got an arrogant, domineering manner. The Yakuza took a liking to John's car. He wants to buy it by force. John turned his back on the Yakuza's offer. But it didn't end there. That very night, the glassy-eyed Lozef was left stunned by coming to the door. First they attacked John and beat his dog to death with a stick, and finally took the '69 Mustang away. Waking up again, John sat on the floor and didn't say a word. He was stroking the dog's body. The dog was not only a reminder of John's wife. It was also the chain that kept him from returning to the past. As long as that chain remained in place, John had a reason to reject his other self. But now that the chains have been broken, the killer's blood boiled over again. And from that moment on, Baba Yaga is back. But the Lozef on the other end didn't seem to feel anything. So he took John's car to the tuning shop. Seeing the Mustang being very familiar, the owner of the tuning shop knew something was wrong. Lozef still didn't think anything of it. And he was proud to say that he had killed the owner's dog too. Haha, you stole his car and killed his dog. You're really something, aren't you? The boss was laughing and beating up Yakuza as he spoke. The news soon reached Vigo's ears. He was the father of Lozef. He was also the leader of the most powerful gang in the area. Naturally, Vigo would not allow his son to be bullied. But when he heard what his son had done, Vigo's back went cold and he immediately sent someone to recall Lozef. When father and son met, Vigo beat up Lozef until he couldn't hold his head up, because the boy had made a mess that was too big to handle. That's right, Lozef had no idea. The nobody he'd messed with. He's a legendary killer in the underworld. Back in the day, Vigo saw John stab 3 men to death with a pencil. A pencil is not a pen, you know. He used a pencil, son. Vigo's blood pressure was getting higher and higher. But John's timing was clearly more than that. 4 years ago John was trying to get out of the game. He took on a mission assigned by Vigo. It was to eliminate all hostile forces. Of course the chances of success were quite low. Everyone thought it was. It was an impossible task. But John did it. The bodies were piled up like a mountain that day. And it was because of that mountain that. It was because of this mountain that Vigo was able to dominate the region. The so-called Baba Yaga is the witch in the fairy tale of the wicked country. Many believe that John was such a terrible being. Even if his enemy was the killer of killers, he still had a way of devouring them all. And in the presence of such a monster, you killed his dog and stole his car. What the hell were you thinking, kid? Just as Vigo's lungs were about to explode, John opened the dusty box. There were knives and guns inside. And a bunch of gold coins that were only used in the underworld. John was only halfway through. The phone beside him suddenly rang. It turns out that Vigo wants to wipe his son's ass. He wanted John to settle the misunderstanding. To settle the misunderstanding in a civilized way. John couldn't understand what was being said. So he just hung up. Understanding that there was no room for negotiation, he had no choice. To save his son, he decided to make the first move. That night 12 assassins infiltrated John's house. But John had been waiting for them for a long time. In just a matter of time, John beat the visiting assassins to the punch. Knowing that the operation had failed, Vigo changed his strategy. He puts out a $2 million reward to the League of Assassins. Then he called on the elite assassin Marcus. Marcus and John have a mysterious relationship. But Vigo believes that everything has a price. The terms were attractive. Marcus took the deal. At the same time, John took his equipment to a hotel. It was known as the Continental Hotel. On the surface, it was a decent-run hotel. In reality, it was the property of the League of Assassins. They were all over the world. They specialize in providing various services to killers. John finds his way around to the owner of the hotel, trying to find out where Yakuza is as soon as possible. The owner was very lost. He gave John the information he wanted right away. But he also reminded John, "Don't forget the rules of the place. If someone attempts murder in the hotel, the League executives would be very unhappy. And if they're not happy, they'll come for your life." John then goes out to kill Yakuza. As night falls, John infiltrates the target's location. After taking care of a few guards, John runs into Lozef. Surprised or not to find his father knocking on the door too. Yakuza's hands and feet go limp with fear. But at the crucial moment, someone intervened. And so Lozef was able to get away. Of course, John wasn't discouraged. Armed with a pistol, he made his way from the bathhouse to the ballroom. In the meantime, the Yakuza's men kept pouring in. But they couldn't stop John. In a state of unity, John turned the club into a funeral parlor. But the mission failed. The Yakuza still found an opportunity to escape. John had no choice but to return to the hotel. After treatment, John lies in bed recovering. But Marcus was already watching from afar. A precise camera shot wakes John up immediately. And just at that moment, another assassin enters the room. This woman and John were supposed to be the saviors. But Vigo promised an extra bonus for John's head. Tempted by the money, the hitwoman no longer cared about the rules of the hotel. So what? In the end, John beat the shit out of her. When he found out that the commissioner was Vigo, John decided to give her a little shock and anxiety. So he left the murderess with the next-door neighbor. He left the restaurant with his own weapons. John was fine, but the neighbor was not. Because in no time at all, the murderess had killed the next-door neighbor. It wasn't long before John found Vigo's stronghold. He set fire to all the traps inside. When he got the news, Vigo sent his men to check it out. But when he arrived on the scene, John suddenly killed the wrong man and took on a dozen others. But John was just getting the hang of it. A car crashed into him. As John was also a human being, so he lost consciousness on the spot. John woke up again and was in the hands of Vigo. Vigo was furious. He didn't understand why John had lost his temper. It's just a dog. Why did he have to drag so many people in to be buried with him? John said it was necessary. Because Vigo's son had not only killed a dog, he had also killed a man's last hope. Understanding that there was no communication between the two sides, Vigo ordered his men to take care of John. But in the nick of time, Marcus, who was outside the house, swooped in to rescue him. After getting rid of the guards, John heads towards the pier to stop Vigo. The momentum is gone. Vigo knew there was no way to protect his son. In his grief and anger, he can only contact Lozef to find out where he is. Thereafter, John soon guides Lozef to the afterlife. With an execution-style shooting, John finally takes care of the dog's killer. But the story doesn't end there. Not long afterwards, the murderess found out that John and Marcus were secretly in cahoots and told Vigo about it. And with a lot of anger, Vigo grabbed Marcus. Not only did he take the opportunity to vent his anguish at the loss of his son, he also revealed to John that Marcus was dead. His wife is dead, his dog is dead, and now his friend is dead. With a man like John, who is not even on the edge, he now has every reason to destroy Vigo. Meanwhile, the Continental Hotel finds the foul female assassin and simply took her out according to the rules. And the owner had no intention of turning over Vigo's hand. So he reported John's whereabouts to him. Vigo managed to stop him at the pier. Seeing that his men had been cleaned up, he then proposes a fist fight. Then he stabbed John with a knife. He thought he had the upper hand. But he was clearly naive. In the blink of an eye, John gave himself up and took the blade. And then used the same knife to not let Vigo ever get up again. After the incident was over, John was wounded and went to an animal shelter. While treating his wounds, he accidentally found a pit bull. John decided to take him with him, to spend the second half of his life with him. But not long after. This day John was rummaging through another acquaintance. The purpose was to retrieve the Mustang he'd lost earlier. By coincidence, the car happened to fall into the hands of Vigo's brother. But John didn't take his life. Instead, he wanted the matter to be settled. Seeing John's offer of an olive branch, my brother was very touched. But before a few days of peace had passed, there was trouble for John again. A man called Santino, the second son of an Italian crime syndicate. Back in the day, when John was on an impossible mission, he had asked Santino for help. At that time, a contract was drawn up between the two parties. Santino could lend a hand, but John had to give something in return. And now the time had come. Santino produced the mark with the bloodstain, asking John to carry out a mission for him. Who knew that John would say no? Because he had no intention of getting back into business. Of course, Santino couldn't stand the thought of being shut out. "You, my friend, don't give me any face." So he immediately blew up John's house. It was so hard to get the dog and the car. Now you've lost the house and the memories. John was furious. So he went back to the hotel owner. He wanted to find out where Santino was. Naturally, the owner understands the reasons. But unfortunately, this time it was really John Wick who broke the contract after all. It is the rule of the league. If John wants to seek revenge on Santino, the boss advised him to finish the job first. Otherwise the alliance will definitely start sanctions. As for the mission Santino gave, what was it? Simply put, it was to seize power. It turns out, Santino's father was a member of the board of directors. He had a lot of power in his hands. But when his father died, he didn't pass on his position to his son. Instead, he gave everything to Gianna. Santino wanted to rise to the top. So he asked John to get rid of the woman who was in his way. The next day John arrived in Rome. First he checked into the local Continental Hotel. Then he got all the equipment he needed. And once everything was in place, John was on the move. It was the day of Gianna's coronation. She would become a director of the League of Assassins. John entered in the dark. He found Gianna in the bathroom, just about to take a bath. Gianna and John were old friends. She could understand the man's plight. But since death was inevitable, she chose to go to hell in style. John took her hand in his and watched the Gianna lose her life. Then he added another shot to finish the job. But no sooner had John stepped out of the bathhouse, he was immediately confronted by Gianna's bodyguard. He knew it was bad and shoot John. John didn't intend to dwell on it. He ran straight for the exit. But he didn't get very far. John ran into one of Santino's men, the short-haired girl. Faced with a figure he didn't expect, John didn't feel right. The short-haired girl hadn't come to meet him, but she wanted to take John's life while she could. A large number of enemy troops swarmed in early. They attacked John in sections. Luckily John was prepared. By using the guns he had hidden earlier, He was able to fight his way out. Of course, the bodyguard, who loves his sister the most, didn't give up easily. But he chased him all the way to the Continental Hotel. Now there's no more fighting. According to the rules of the league, they had to stop. Things were just settling down. John got a call from Santino. Santino said he didn't mean to break up the fight. After all, his sister had been killed. If he didn't do something about it, he'd be suspected. For old time's sake, let's settle the misunderstanding in a civilized way. John couldn't understand what was being said. And he hung up. Knowing that there was no room for negotiation, Santino decided to make the first move. He immediately contacted the League of Assassins. He offered a $7 million reward for John's head. Well, you villains. You villains always play the same game. No matter what. Last time no one wanted $2 million, now everyone wants $7 million. So on John's way back to New York, one killer after another came to his door. Of course John wasn't afraid. No matter how good he was still a human being. John was badly wounded after a series of blows. He had no choice but to ask for help. And it was the Bowery King, the leader of the underworld intelligent network in New York. Help was not meant to be a nuisance. But given Santino's imminent rise to power, New York was bound to become his turf. Rather than let the boy gossip, I'd rather let John do it. So he gave John a gun and 7 bullets. And pointed out exactly where Santino was. And so Baba Yaga returned to the Matrix. Seeing John coming through the door, Santino was so frightened that he ran for his life. John was not going to let him go and immediately went after him. The next few scenes were filled with shooting, dodging and snatching guns on a loop. John had killed over 50 guards in just 3 steps. Seeing that the guards could not hold out any longer, the short-haired girl decided to do it herself. And she was stabbed to death. Finally, John found Santino at the Continental Hotel. Santino said he could stay here for the rest of his life. Oops, he was right. So John finishes what he wanted with a shot. After all was said and done, John took the dog back to his cozy place. John was so relieved at the moment. The owner of the hotel approached John in the morning. John had been stripped of his membership due to the shooting last night. The league was after him too. And all the people in the square were killers. One order from the owner and John would be a beehive. So why did the owner hold off? Because he respects the man. So he decided to give John a chance. It'll be an hour before his time is up. As for how to use this gap in time, it was up to John to choose. John thanked his boss for his kindness. And left a message that if you want to die, come find me. And with that John took off running. And began to play hide and seek with the world's killers. Of course, running for your life is no fun. To ensure the safety of his family, first John took the dog to the Continental Hotel. After that, he went to the library to get his belongings. A necklace to enlist the help of the Russian mob. Gold coins for a ride to dinner and a suite. The badge was a contract for John's help to someone else. Now he's going to find that person for their help. As for the photo of his wife, it was just a photo of his wife. But the promised time hadn't come yet. One big guy tried to sneak away. After all, $14 million is a lot of money. Now John was like a ring of lottery tickets waiting to be redeemed. But then the big guy didn't say a word. He just thrust a knife into it. Luckily, Johns took it on with a book. Using the same book, John killed the big guy. So John went to see an old man. This old man and John had known each other for over 10 years. He used to be a key maker, but now he's a Chinese doctor. And with the help of the old man, John was able to mostly recover. As soon as 6 o'clock rolls in, the killers will go wild. 14 million, it was not a small amount. I'll take it even if it costs me my life. No matter young and old, everyone was after John. And John didn't back down. So you try to stab me? I'll stab you twice. In no time at all, killing the assassins were like performing modern art. As the night got darker and darker, the atmosphere was getting warmer and warmer. So John was using horses to kill his enemies. The horses were jumping and jumping and the enemies were flying and flying. After that, John left with his horse, endlessly rushing into the city. Here some bikers follow. The brother rides in fast, but dies even faster. After getting away from a bunch of lunatics, John arrives at the Russian mob's stronghold. The man in charge is an older woman. He's also the parent who raised John. She knows what he wants to do. But since this is the territory of the League of Assassins, she's reluctant to lend a hand. But John didn't care. She forced her to help him with his necklace. She had no choice but to help him escape from New York. The League's top brass sent an adjudicator to the Continental Hotel. It turns out that they knew the boss gave John some leeway. So they told the guy to get out in 7 days and go home. Of course, he wasn't the only one who helped John. Then the judge called on the beggars to help him. After all, if he hadn't given out bullets, John would not have broken the rules. The Bowery King was furious. The bullet that ended Santino wasn't my bullet. Why should I be responsible for it? The result was a disagreement that led to a disagreement. Meanwhile, John, who had escaped from New York, arrived in Casablanca, where there is also a Continental Hotel manager named Sophia. She is the woman John is looking for. It turns out that Sophia had been helped by John, and there was a contract between them. Now John was in trouble. He asked for an introduction to someone. Sophia's former boss, Barada. And since this guy knew the elders at the top of the league, John wants to get him to the elders, to convince them to spare his life. Of course, Sophia didn't want to get involved in this. But a contract is a contract. So Sophia had to help John. Then the two of them came to Barada. Barada was very forthcoming. He told John right away, "You'll meet the elders if you walk to your death in the desert." So now that they had the information, and Sophia didn't intend to stay much longer. But at that very moment, Barada took a fancy to Sophia's dog. He wanted to keep him as a price for the information. Sophia didn't like it, and Barada shot the dog. "You're an idiot. Don't you know it's a big no-no to mess with someone's dog?" Although the dog escaped with his bulletproof vest. But Sophia was still upset. She immediately turned on him. The resentment was mutual. Without saying a word, John joined the fray. As for the two dogs, they didn't stay idle either. And when they saw their target, in one swift movement, they got into Bella's trousers. And so, with 2 dogs and 2 men working together, a stronghold was wiped out. After this, Sophia takes John to the desert and gives him a sip of water as a parting gift. Back to New York. As I said earlier, the adjudicator is upset by the Bowery King. In order to teach him a lesson, she approached the owner of the fair-priced sushi restaurant. Zero is sure that many people are afraid of the good and the bad. Before, when the judge came alone, he had a lot of excuses. Now Zero was around to make a scene. No one dared to say more. Afterwards, Zero stabbed the lady. He immediately stabbed her hand into a skewer. Then he went on to the stronghold of the underground network. 1 bullet counts as 1 stab, 7 bullets count as 7 stabs. Not a bit of help from you. In an instant, the Bowery King was slowly dying away. And while the adjudicator was enforcing the law, John had passed out in the desert. He woke up again. He found that he had actually found the elders' base camp. Seeing the opportunity was too good to miss, John rushed to make a deal with the other side. If he could be spared his death, he would sell the rest of his life to Elder Zhang. Of course, John didn't want to do that. But the only way to remember his wife was to live. The old man agreed to his request. So he asked John to show his loyalty with 1 finger. And he had to get rid of the hotel owner who had abused his power. But John had just returned to New York. Zero and his partner immediately came to meet him. But the hero is smart enough to feel his way up the hotel steps. But Zero is the one who has to kick the can down the road. But Zero is no ordinary man. Since he and his partner were John's fans, he'd never let go of him. Unfortunately, John loves dogs but not bald heads. After he had a good time with the dog, he left Bald King to go to the boss. Originally, John wanted to fulfill the elder's order. But the boss's brainwashing skills were extremely powerful. He was able to convince John. He convinced John to join him in his rebellion. Wow, this is really something. When the adjudicator found out, she immediately reported it to the League. The adjudicator decided to close the hotel for the time being. So since it's closed for business, that meant that the place was free to ignore the rules and go on a killing spree. A group of special forces quickly invaded the hotel. They were very well equipped. No ordinary bullets could penetrate their armor. But John and the hotel staff are no slouches either. You have +9 armor, I have +10 guns. With more fierce firepower, they were able to kill the special forces. After the shootout, after the gun battle, John started to fight Zero's partner. If you've seen the movie Total Assault, you probably know how tough these two guys are. But so what? Because the man in front of him is Zhang Wei. After a wave of slow action, John manages to turn the tide. The little fan was taken care of. Now it was the turn of the clingiest of them all, Zero. Yes, Zero's blade is really fast and accurate. If you don't watch out, he'll stab you to death. But this guy has a weakness too. He talks too much. On the left, he says we're really alike. And on the right, don't we look alike? The various renovations made John very uncomfortable to hear. As a result, in a fit of rage, he blew Zero to death. Found a large number of people cleared out by John. The adjudicator realized it's better to solve the misunderstanding in a civilized way. So proposed to the hotel owner that he could remain in charge of the place, but only if John was dead. Without hesitation, the owner shot John several times. And after John falls, the adjudicator wanted to see his dead body. But when she got downstairs, the adjudicator's lungs exploded with anger. She immediately went to the hotel boss to ask him about it. The boss didn't know that much. He didn't mean to miss the target. In the end, there was nothing she could do. And so the adjudicator had to leave the hotel with a sense of unease. And where did John go? It turned out that he had been rescued by the Bowery King. He was furious, because the League made a fool of him. He wanted revenge and asked John to join him in the rebellion. And John said, "Let's do this in the next movie." That's it for today's episode. If you have any thoughts on John Wick, please feel free to discuss them in the comments below. If you like my videos, please subscribe to my channel. I'm Spoiler and I'll see you next time.